It's now 10 years since the US-led invasion of Iraq, a war that was controversial and for some illegal. But a decade on, and it's clear that the war is far from forgotten. Its effects still keenly felt by the people of Iraq and the American veterans who fought there. It was a war to find weapons of mass destruction that it seems were never there. A war to topple a dictator and install democracy. 10 years on, the legacy is still unclear. The scars of war still very fresh. This group of veterans marked the anniversary with a gathering outside the White House. Veterans who are now among the most vocal critics of the war. Matt Howard saw 2 tours of Iraq in the Marine Corps.
We were doing some really reprehensible things and that were making things significantly worse. You have a generation of veterans that are dealing with suicide at record rates, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and military sexual trauma.
Dubbed by the US Operation Iraqi Freedom, the war cost $730 billion. By the time the US withdrew in December 2011, nearly 4,500 Americans had died, more than 32,000 wounded. But despite the cost of conflict and the legality issue over the lack of a United Nations mandate, proponents of the war like Senator John McCain feel America should in fact have stayed for longer.
Maliki, Alawi, and Barzani were ready to make a deal on a residual force of some 20,000 troops, which would have given them counterintelligence capability, surveillance capability, and other capabilities. And this administration let it dwindle and dwindle.
Indeed, some supporters believe that removing Saddam Hussein has empowered Iran and given Tehran new opportunities of influence on Iraq's new government.
The fact that we're pulling away from Iraq and not trying to influence it, I think is tragic. Maliki, therefore, has another influencer much closer than we are in Iran. He certainly doesn't want to be in Iran's hip pocket, but he's accepting a degree of influence that I'm convinced would not have been there if we were still a major player in Iraq.
130,000 Iraqi civilians were killed in the conflict, and survivors say the after effects are still being felt as a result of weapons America used, like white phosphorus.
A generation of Iraqi children are born without limbs that work, with a brain that is underdeveloped. And on top of that, many of them had lost their parents to the US and the resurgency or the resistance wars. So who's going to be responsible of these children?
An anniversary remembered for some, not for what was won, but rather what was lost. 10 years since the invasion, and the Iraq war still looms large in the American psyche. Some justify it, others condemn it. But either way, its effects are still being felt by many people here. This is Nick Harper for JN1 in Washington, D.C.